Hi guys, in this video we're just going to be colouring Thanos from the Avengers films. If you saw my last video, I created a step-by-step tutorial on drawing Thanos or sketching him, like the image you can see on screen at the moment. And the first thing I'm going to do is just quickly ink over this. And I didn't record this step because it's very repetitive and honestly quite boring to watch. I changed my original sketch to red, just so that when I ink over it in black it's easier to differentiate between the lines. And I usually work in Photoshop, but I've actually opened this up now in Manga Studio. I think it's also called Clip Studio Paint, because I find that I can get much cleaner line art in this program. So I've inked that off camera, and I've opened this back up in Photoshop for colouring because I don't know how to use Manga Studio very well for things like that. And I've started with something a little bit different to what I normally would do, and I've actually created a little bit of a colour swatch just so that it's a bit quicker for me to colour pick. Now Thanos is purple, so obviously I'm going for variations of purple, and the first thing I'm going to do is just block in a base flat colour. So I'm starting with his skin, and I will do his helmet on a separate layer. I've tried to start with a fairly mid-tone colour. From there I'm going to select a slightly darker tone of this same colour, and I'm going to start marking in some of the shadows anywhere that's not in the light. It's only slightly darker at this point, but what I will do is bit by bit go one shade darker and go over all these bits. So it is quite a repetitive process in a lot of ways, and it's definitely not the only way to work. I mean, really there's an infinite amount of ways that you could colour something in Photoshop, and I was just playing around a little bit with this. So again, all I'm doing is just darkening it bit by bit as I go, and that's anywhere where the lighting would struggle to get to. So especially around the edging of his helmet. I'm imagining the light is coming a little bit from in front and above him, hence why there's a lot more shadow from his helmet over his eyes, and obviously the eyes are set back compared to a lot of the other features. So that also means the top lip is going to be darker in shade and the bottom lip is going to be lighter. You probably noticed that I'm being quite messy with this, and that's because once I've painted the helmet I will put that on a layer above the face, so it will completely cover these bits anyway. So I was just doing it to save a bit of time really, and because I'm just honestly a bit messy. So once I'm happy with some of that shadow, I actually go in and just mark the eyes a little bit blue. I tried not to oversaturate the eyes too much and make them look ridiculously cartoony or anything. Obviously there is line art to this, so it's never going to be super realistic. And once I'd done that, I then moved on to the same process again, but instead of going darker shade by shade, I actually start going lighter. Anywhere where I think the light would hit, maybe even a few smaller highlights. So that includes the peak of his chin, his nose, his cheekbones, a few things like that. And obviously I'm taking into account the indentations and the patterning on his face as to where some lighting and shading would be. So moving on to the next layer, this is going to be the base of his helmet, and I'm just going to start by blocking in the flat colours. It does have a similar value to the purple that I've used, so to give it a little bit of contrast I've tried to push it a little bit more towards a blue tint, just to give it a little bit of variation. And I started quite dark with this one, so for no reason at all really, I've gone in this time with the lighting and put the lighting in there first, and I've tried to make it look quite reflective. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go in with my darker shade, and again get anywhere where the light wouldn't get, any small drop shadows or anything like that. I also included his collar on this layer, just because it was the same colour. I decided that to do the golden part of his helmet, I'll do that on a separate layer, and also do his body armour on another separate layer, just because once you've painted them you can lock the pixels, and that is then easier for painting within the lines without worrying about being messy, so it can save you quite a lot of time. You can probably tell now, same process again, starting with a flat base colour. You could then go in, add your highlights or even add your shading first. I chose to go with the darker colours first. As I got darker I actually tried to make it a little bit more brown, and as I got lighter I tried to make it a little bit more yellow, to make the piece a little bit more interesting. Now, in my opinion, metallic surfaces like this are really quite difficult to paint, although I am quite happy with the outcome of this, but I did need obviously a lot of reference to get this to look the way it did. There's usually quite a lot of contrast with metallic surfaces, so you'll notice the lighter colours are almost white, and there's also a lot of reflection light, so even in the shaded areas you'll see thin strips of light bouncing back. I do add more bounce light at the end. And then exactly the same thing with his armour. Again, I'm following reference. I've simplified the armour on this because it really would have taken me ages, and to be honest I was getting pretty bored by the time I was onto his body armour. So I tried to keep it fairly simple. but sticking with the same colours that I'd used on the trim of his helmet. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with him now. There's still a few bits to add, as already mentioned, such as the bounce light, maybe playing around with the contrast, I'll see. But for now, I'm going to stick a very simple background in there. So I'm just blocking it in. I changed brush for this, but it really doesn't matter what you use. I was just seeing if it would give it a bit of texture. I think I end up using the smudge tool anyway, just to blend it all in. And I was trying to go for a sort of space themed, stars background. So I started just with some greys and some blacks with a slight tint of blue. And then I went in and just very lightly added in a very pale blue and a deep purple. Again, I've only stuck them in there quite quickly, and then I'm just going to blend them. Really simple background, but for how simple it is, it works quite well. And the last thing I'm going to do to that background is just add in some signs of stars. So I just used one of my normal brushes and I just added a bit of scatter to that and threw it into the background randomly. I did it on several layers and I just kept turning the opacity down of each layer because it was a little bit too strong for what I wanted. So I just kept going with that until I was happy with it. I put some in individually as well. And the last thing I'm doing here is just adding that bounce light. The reference didn't have anything quite like this, but I wanted to add a little bit more colour and variation to it and make the piece pop out a little bit more. So I'm trying to do this as if there is either a light below him or some of this blue in the background is bouncing off anything below him and hitting the underside of his face, hence why his chin is so heavily coloured. Below his lip, for example, and even his top lip, above his eyes, the bottom of his nose, basically anywhere with a plane facing downward. I also tried to add a little bit on his right, or the left that we're looking at, onto his helmet. With the helmet being quite reflective, I could add the colour quite strong, and I really liked the look it gave on the armour. So once that's on the skin, the helmet and the armour, that's him done. So I have erased the edges a little bit and just upped the contrast a little bit in Photoshop, but that's him finished. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's not very often I actually get around to finishing many of my art pieces, or even adding any colour, but I quite like this one. I hope you guys found something within the video helpful, or just enjoyed watching. Let me know what other videos you guys want to see. Please do subscribe for more content. Like the video, leave a comment below. Thanks so much everyone.